All right, let's, if we may, start up and we're going to start our discussion of new imperialism, looking at the area that we call Southeast or South Asia. And again, this phenomenon takes place in the 1800s, early 1900s, mostly 1800s. And in the year 1800, most of Southeast Asia was in the control of the local people, except for the Philippines, which Spain had taken over. Think Magellan, 1521, circumnavigating the world, stops off in the Philippines, conquers. Magellan, of course, is killed by the great Filipino warrior Lapu-Lapu. But then his crew defeat the Philippines, take the Philippines for Spain. The Philippines was under Spanish control and had been for 250 plus years. And the Dutch East Indies, which is modern day Indonesia. Let's take a look at these areas on the map. Here are the Philippines, and this brown area here are the Dutch East Indies. This area was controlled by the Dutch, by the people of the Netherlands, and they traded for spices with the local people of that area. And we're going to find out, looking at this map, that by the year 1900, in 100 years, all of this area here in colors had been taken over by European powers or the United States. England is going to take over this area in red, all of India with its enormous population, modern day Afghanistan and Pakistan, and moved into this area of what is now called Myanmar, was Burma during that period, down into Malaysia. And the French, not to be outdone, are going to take over this area here of Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and the only area of Southeast Asia that would not be colonized is the area that they called Siam, the area of modern day Thailand. We're also going to find out that China, although not conquered, had been divided up into what was called spheres of influence, and that different European countries traded in and were influential in different parts of China. Starting off here with Great Britain, in 1819, the English started a new colony in Singapore, which we just saw on that map. Singapore was a very successful city for traders traveling in the area. Next, England would invade Burma, modern-day Myanmar. Their presidents brought this country, their monarchy, to an end and put England in complete control. And let's go back to the map. I'm a big fan of maps. And what we see, we know that England and France had fought for control over trade in India in the 1700s. England won. England took control over much of the coastal areas of India, setting up many trade colonies. This is Malaysia. And if you're now, let's try and take a look. If you're coming around Africa, and pretend Africa's here, and you're coming up here in your European ship, right? You could go all the way around the Dutch East Indies, modern day Indonesia, cut through these kind of chain of islands, and pop up here to get to China and or Japan. But a much quicker route, especially if you stopped off in India and dropped off some stuff and went to a few other places in India, would be to cut down this way to get to China. Okay, so England takes this area of modern day Malaysia and they turn it into a trade capital. It becomes a city where many traders who were bringing their goods to and from India on their way to China would stop in Malaysia. And one thing that happens oftentimes in areas where there's a lot of trade is that trade is taxed. Okay, and that the local government makes a lot of money in taxes off the trade from the area. Okay, keep that in mind, because I'm gonna actually stop here for a second. All right, and you may have noticed that my slide changed slightly. I did a little bit of research, found some pictures I wanted to show you. This picture was already there. You can see the local people doing work for the English. Yeah, part of the deal when you had your country taken over is that you work for the country. This wasn't slavery. I mean, these people oftentimes, most of the time, were not controlled by the companies they worked for, but they worked for European countries for very low wages. These were not well fairly paid people. Here's an image from the period of the Europeans starting a trading city in Southeast Asia. Okay, and the city that they were starting was in Malaysia. Now, I always show this to my students when I teach this, and I want you to take a look at this beautiful city. Look at that, twin towers lit up. Just is that New York City? Is it some fancy European capital, right? And this has got to be some rich city and some rich country. Look at that, right? Here's another image of the same city from a different angle. It's right on the water. Look at that. They have like a fountain in the middle of their bay right there. Those are the same twin towers that you saw in the picture. I mean, what an incredibly gorgeous place, yes? I need to visit it. Which capital and in which rich world country is that? I gotta see it. Here's another picture of that same twin towers. Wait a minute though. What? Those are the same towers right there. But what I see in the picture is abject poverty, the type of poverty that you don't see in America. These are people who live in houses that are more like huts or maybe shacks. These are steel corrugated roofs. These houses are made of weak looking plywood. This is the kind of poverty you don't even, I've never seen this. This you don't see this in America. I don't think this exists in most countries in the Americas. I mean, I've been down to Mexico. TJ, this is not how it looks. Wait a minute though. Right there in the shadow of the twin towers, we have this kind of poverty. Oh my gosh! Look at that polluted river with all of those rusted steel corrugated roofs right along with the pollution. How does this happen? How do you have such riches? What looks like a city greater than any city, even in our country, in our rich American country. And in the shadow of the city is the kind of poverty that you don't see anywhere in our country. The answer to the question is imperialism. This is what it looks like when a European or any rich country comes in, takes your land, turns your capital city into a trading post that over the hundreds of years gets turned into this rich, crazy, fancy, beautiful city. But the workers, but the people who live in this city who are being taken advantage of live like that. There is no better example of what European imperialism of the 1800s looked like to the local population than what I just showed you. France also, we mentioned, takes over. They had trading posts in modern-day Vietnam, and missions. Christian missionaries would go and teach their religion to the people of Vietnam. When France saw that the British had moved into Burma, they did not want to be outdone. Remember that the French and the British are rivals in the 1800s. They had fought these wars of the 1700s, the 7 Years' War, Wars of Austrian Succession, and they were rivals. In the Americas, they were rivals. The French gave money to the American colonists to fight the British. The British were really mad about that. We learned all this. So yeah, they didn't want to be outdone. They colonized land in Southeast Asia as well. It took 30 years, but they get complete control over the country. By the 1880s, France had the land of Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Annan, Tonkin. They had created an area that they called French Indochina. Remember that. It will become important. following World War II. And the only area that was unconquered was this area of Thailand that was called Siam. So we have British Burma, we have French Indochina, and we have this country right here that was allowed to stay independent, largely so these people wouldn't fight each other. And that is the modern country of Thailand. So what about us? What about the new United States that we just learned had formed in the late 1700s? Well, the United States was also part of the imperialism. And although my slide that I created here focuses on what the United States did after the Spanish-American War, I want to pause for a second, if I may, and I want to talk about what we did to the Native Americans. Yeah, during this period, from 1800 to 1900, the early American colonists, or now Americans, conquered all of the land west of the Appalachian Mountains, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. We know that the Cherokee were forced out of their land in the 1820s and 30s, along with the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and the there was one more, I can't remember, the Creek. The modern areas of Alabama, of Georgia, of southern parts of the United States. And of course, that land was taken and given to the Americans. The most tragic example are the Cherokee, who tried to follow all the rules and are still kicked out and forced to march to Oklahoma, which is a really long walk, thousands of miles. So many of the Cherokee were killed in this period or died on the march. It's called the Trail of Tears. The United States also then, and after the Civil War, the United States moves up. Remember the story of Lewis and Clark? I don't know if you guys remember. They moved up into the Oregon Territory, which is modern day Oregon, Montana, Idaho, Washington State, and they conquered the Native Americans of this area. This is when we had the Native American. I believe that she is on a coin. It's on a gold dollar. What's her name? Sacagawea? No. Was it? I don't know. I'll look it up. Anyways, during these years, the Americans fought what are called the Indian Wars. Okay, the Indian Wars were the taking of all of that land, okay, from the Appalachians, from the East Coast to the West Coast, were the U.S. doing imperialism. Don't let the book fool you that it's not mentioned in there, okay? Also, we fought the Mexican-American War, right? Remember the Alamo? The state of Texas declared itself an independent country. It was Mexico. It was part of Mexico, right? So the Mexican army moves in, tries to tell the Americans, you can't do this. Davy Crockett, the whole story of the Alamo. They kill all the Texans who had tried to steal that land from Mexico. And then the Americans send their army, they defeat Mexico. America takes California, yeah, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, and as a result of defeating Mexico in the Mexican-American War, our land, of course. That's why our land is called Los Angeles. It's not an English word, folks. Those are Spanish words, right? The angels. In fact, the true name of Los Angeles is La Ciudad de la Reina de Los Angeles, the city of the Queen of Angels. That's why all of the names around here are in Spanish, because of course we know that this land was New Spain for hundreds of years, and it was Mexico for about 27 years before the United States defeats Mexico in a war and takes the land. This also is an example of imperialism, okay, of Europeans, of how the United States was practicing imperialism. But the book's going to pick up, okay, the book's going to pick up in 1989, in 1898, when the United States fights a war against Spain, okay, and in this war, which started in Cuba, Fun fact, Teddy Roosevelt, president, becomes famous in this war. He's a rough rider. He and his soldiers conquer land in Cuba, and they're soldiers who are on horseback. Okay. Um, and we get Cuba as a result of the Spanish-American War. The United States defeats Spain. In Cuba, they take Cuba, and they take Puerto Rico, which, by the way, they never give back. Okay, the U.S. will give Cuba back to the Cuban people at some point in the 1900s, but we do not give back Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is still a territory of the United States. There are 3.5 million Americans who live in Puerto Rico, 3.5 million American citizens who live in Puerto Rico. Yes, every Puerto Rican is actually an American citizen. In fact, that's why in the 70s and even sometimes today, people talk about Puerto Rico should become a state. If Puerto Rico were a state, it would be the 37th most populous state. There would be 14 states with less people than Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a very populated area. And it's Americans who live there, but they don't have statehood. They do not have equal representation. I believe, what was that? No taxation without representation. I've heard this before somewhere. Oh yeah, the revolution, the whole reason this country formed. Oh, gosh, let's not. The United States also takes Guam from Spain and the Philippines. Yeah, Magellan took your land, buddy. Gave your life for the land that Spain controlled for 300 plus years, and now the U.S. takes it in 1898. The U.S. will give the Philippines back to the people of the Philippines, I believe after World War II, because the Filipinos fought so hard against the Japanese and fought with us against them. But the United States still controls Guam, another territory. We have something like 6 or 7 territories scattered around the world. Many of them are islands with smaller populations. They're not all as populated as Puerto Rico, that have American citizens that don't have equal representation under the law. But now America has gotten into the game, not only taking over Puerto Rico, Cuba, Guam, and the Philippines, but also, of course, taking over all of the land in Middle America, basically, from Texas to the south, to the deep south, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, the Oregon Territory, Kansas, and all of that land. And they took that land through war, through killing Native Americans. And of course, the war with Mexico as well.